us on this a little dreary Sunday, but we thank you for being here in Warwick. My name's Nisa, and I work for the Senator's re-election campaign, so we want to thank you for joining us in our Weekends with Whitehouse series. The way this is going to work is the Senator will make some brief remarks, and then we'll open up the floor to your questions. He's going to take as many as he can, so please feel free to ask them, and if you don't get to ask your questions, feel free to see me at the end, and I can write them down. Since this is a little bit of a smaller space and a smaller crowd, we're happy to go without mics, so please feel free, if you can't hear or have any questions, just raise your hand and let us know. If you can join us now, we'll just do the Pledge of Allegiance and get started. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
If you haven't got a chance already, please make sure you give us the most up-to-date contact information when you signed in at the table. That way we can keep you up to date with all the campaign ongoings. Please follow us on our campaign social media. Our Facebook is Sheldon Whitehouse, minus the Senator, and then our campaign website is whitehouseforsenate.com. At this time, I have the privilege to turn over the floor to Chair and Representative Joe McNamara.
Thank you. Thank you, and thank you for coming to CCRI on this Sunday afternoon. Yesterday I was at a Little League baseball opening, so spring is officially here, the beginning of the baseball season. And when I was there, I thought of, and I see some people who are around my age, they might remember this name, Sandy Koufax. Great, right? Great baseball player, great manager. And to paraphrase Sandy Koufax, there are three types of United States senators. Senators that get things done, senators that watch things getting done, and senators that say, what the hell just happened? Sheldon Whitehouse is a United States senator who gets things done for Warwick, for the state of Rhode Island, and for our nation. I have never been so proud of a United States senator when I turned on CNN several times within the last year, and they said, today we have former Attorney General, United States Senator Sheldon Whitehouse of Rhode Island, who will explain why this candidate is not qualified for the cabinet position. It happened more than once, Senator. So that's great. This afternoon, at approximately, it was low tide at 1:30, about 3 miles from here, there's a park called Salters Grove. It has a causeway leading out to it that floods during high tide. This year, due to the fact that Senator Whitehouse got federal environmental funds into the state, families are no longer going to get stranded out on this breakwater fishing because that causeway is being repaired with a bridge to make it accessible. It's that type of action, it's that type of getting things done from Rhode Island that gives me this great honor to introduce my friend and colleague in the federal government, United States Senator Sheldon Whitehouse.
I wish Joe had more personality. If you want to see great local politics in action, follow this guy through the Gatsby Days parade. He is running back and forth, shaking hands in front of every house, sweating through his shirt, and having more damn fun than anybody else in the whole parade. It's probably my favorite parade, so I have a lot of fun, but nobody has as much fun as Joe does. So Joe, thank you for those kind words, and thank you for leading our party. I appreciate it. Thank you all for coming out. I'm very grateful that you're here. I'll say a few things, and then we can have this become a conversation. My wife is a scientist, and she claims to be able to scientifically prove that the sooner I shut up, the more fun everybody has, and that moving into the conversation is good. So we'll be doing that fairly soon, but there are a couple of things I wanted to say just by way of introduction. The first thing is something that I have noticed just in my time in the Senate. When I first ran, you could look at the ads that were on TV in that race, and you knew who was behind every single one of them. You could look at the financial reports, and you knew where every dollar had come from. That wasn't that long ago, and it had been that way for a long, long time before. Nowadays, that has changed. Nowadays, these imaginary groups with names like Rhode Islanders for puppies and peace and prosperity pop up, running TV ads with no way to see who's financing it, and most of that is smear stuff, and it doesn't just happen here in Rhode Island, it's happening all around the country. And what's behind that is obviously a very big special interest enterprise to exert its power in those elections, and behind that is the desire to exert its power in Congress. And half of the mischief never even turns up on TV. Because if you can go to somebody's campaign manager, or if you can go to somebody's chief of staff and say, hey pal, vote with us on this and we'll leave you alone. Cross us and we're spending $5 million in your race, that allows for a dark and secret influence in Washington that is really, really pernicious. And the place where I saw that really take place was on climate change stuff. I was elected in 2006. I took the oath of office, on the other hand, in 2007. And all through 2007, there was tons of bipartisan activity on climate change. All through 2008, it continued. In fact, in 2008, John McCain ran for president as a Republican with a darn good climate change platform. 2009, it still continued. We had bipartisan bills, bipartisan hearings, all of it continued. Then came 2010, specifically January of 2010, which was the Citizens United decision. I see the heads nodding already, you know. From the day of that decision forward, not one Republican has been willing to get on one serious piece of climate legislation. So it's not just some academic question of clean elections and who should be spending money. It rolls straight through into how effective Congress can be in looking out for regular people. And there's the famous Princeton study where they did a statistical analysis of what Congress does compared to what regular people say they want in polls, and found zero correlation between what Congress does and what regular people want. Then they did the same analysis and they looked for the corporate powers. And sure enough, really high correlation. And the conclusion you reach is that Congress has really stopped listening to regular people and is now able to be jammed up by these corporate forces. So that, to me, is one of the key battles ahead. I just left an event in Warren with Claudine Schneider, who was our congresswoman for a long time. And she was here supporting me because she is so passionate about two things. One, solving this climate problem, and two, solving the campaign finance problem. And she understands, too, that they're actually two sides of the same coin. She's part of a group called Issue 1 about the campaign finance problem. And it's Issue 1 because that's the gateway through all of the other issues. So to me, that's kind of the frame for a lot of what we're going to be talking about today. The race situation is surprisingly positive these days. David Cicilline has said publicly that he thinks that it's, at this point, likely that Democrats take back the House. The Cook Political Report now gives us a 45% chance of taking back the Senate. Now, 45% is still only 45%, but it's been moving steadily in one direction. And everybody in the Democratic caucus in the Senate is still working very hard to try to keep that moving so that, in fact, if we have that chance to take back the Senate, we're able to do so. Now, it would be great to take back the House. The one thing about taking back the House and not the Senate is that you can't do a thing about judges and nominations, because they've just been ramming them through, and it gives another 2 years in which President Trump could get a Supreme Court appointment. Whereas if we win in November, then as of January, when the new senators get sworn in, we've got the chance to say, hold it, stop. Unless you're a decent candidate, you're not going anywhere, and put a check and a balance into what is right now one-party rule in Washington. And by the way, one-party rule in a way that is embarrassing most Republicans, which is one of the reasons that Claudine Schneider was there supporting me, because she, as like many Republicans, have said, this is not what our party is about. We are tired of this. So these are important times. If you didn't feel that, you wouldn't be here right now. So I appreciate this. And I'm happy to talk with you about whatever you want. I want to recognize Councilman Rich Corley, who's here from Warwick. I appreciate it. Good to have you here. We used to be in court together some time ago. I was Attorney General, which is one of the great defense lawyers in the state. So, I am happy to talk about whatever it is that you would want to talk about. Anything you want to raise? Yes, sir.
Is there now a Merrick Garland precedent?
In the sense that if we take back the Senate, and if President Trump puts another right-wing special interest extremist in line for the court, then I think we are in a position to say, no, we're simply not going to give them...
He'll get a hearing.
Perhaps not. There's no reason for us to do that. I think what we would say is...
So a precedent was set then?
I think a precedent was set. And I think what will happen in the result of it is that we'll try to get a sensible nominee to the court. And that will be, I think, a big achievement, but not impossible, because Councilman Corley knows Mary McElroy very well. We have just managed to prevail on the White House to appoint Mary McElroy as our U.S. District Judge. She's the woman who President Obama appointed and couldn't get through the committee in time. So sometimes they listen to reason.
Can I get a second question in?
Sure.
I'm concerned about the Sinclair Tribune possible merger.
Yep, you should be.
Fake news, well, we've got a fake news network, but we don't need all the television stations spouting out fake news.
Yeah.
So what can be done about that?
Well, we have to get some control back of the FCC and of the Department of Justice, so that whether that's a Federal Communications Commission violation or whether that's an antitrust violation at the department level.
Would Sinclair be very different?
Sinclair is the big news company. Yeah. Sorry. So I don't know if you all saw the little clip
Oh, yeah.
that was up on the internet showing all the news anchors and news people from all the country reciting the exact same script through to each other. The saddest part for me was about 3 minutes into it, there was Frank Coletta. I mean, what a heartbreaker to see somebody like that having to do that. But they've fixed their contracts in such a way that they can put immense pressure on local broadcasters, huge ban areas where if they fire you, you can't work again in the area, so you actually have to move away from your community. And it's a crafty thing to take a corporate message and make somebody who everybody over decades has come to trust, like Frank Coletta, be your mouthpiece and not have the ability to say, this message is brought to you by our owners. Something as simple as that, rather than treating it as if it was legitimate. Yeah?
What happened to the FCC regulation that you could only own so many stations within a certain area?
They've been nibbling and nibbling and nibbling away at that. They've been using the existence of the internet as an argument that even if you own all the stations in an area, you're still competing with Facebook News. So the FCC has not been particularly helpful in this area, and you now have, I think, potentially dangerous levels of news monopoly. And it's been made worse by this new business of fake news. And when we think about fake news, I can remember reading the National Enquirer, and the fake news was that there were like people from outer space who were running a grocery store in Idaho, or they found the love child of JFK and Marilyn Monroe living in a salt cave in Utah, or
Elvis lives.
Elvis lives. Elvis lives, spotted in the parking lot. So, you know, all of that was fake news, but it was harmless fake news. It was Mad Magazine, it was The Onion, it was National Enquirer, it was all that stuff. What we have now is this really weird brand of weaponized, politically weaponized fake news. And that's new, and that's different. And if you get this combination of monopoly and weaponized fake news, you get into a situation in which democracy really gets in trouble. Because if you're going to be a good citizen of democracy, you've got to have good information to be a good citizen. So that's really a danger. And it hit me in the nose when I came through the supermarket shopping line the day after the election. And there was the National Enquirer. And the headline of the National Enquirer, the front page, wasn't about Elvis, and it wasn't about the JFK, Marilyn Monroe love child, and it wasn't about aliens. It said, Hillary, corrupt, racist, criminal. That's the new kind of fake news when that's what's being put out on election day by the National Enquirer. So we've got a big issue in response to what you've said about Sinclair and the monopoly.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes? Go ahead. And then we'll go to you, Ben.
We've been bombarded with all kinds of pleas to help people, especially, and it's very confusing to know where to put our energy in to make a difference. It seems to me that, for instance, to go do anything about the Miller situation would be to put all the emphasis on the venal people in the House to understand what will happen to them. Is that what we're doing? But can you give us guides on where we can put some energy? Because right now I turn on my computer and there's, 5 or 6 people asking me to go do something.
One of my favorite people in the Senate was a short, powerful, funny, smart woman named Barbara Mikulski. And when she got a question about what we should do, she would always say, don't agonize, organize. So I have heeded that advice of hers, and I think that particularly in Rhode Island, where we're generally fairly aligned, organizations are able to get out there and reach these other states. So if it's the Environment, the League of Conservation Voters, if it's Women's Rights, Planned Parenthood, if you can go through the list, but participate in the organizations, they're going to help carry whatever message you are passionate about out into these other states. We're doing that even with my campaign. Joe Cayazzo right here, my campaign manager, when the race was on in Alabama for Doug Jones, we were piping phone calls and fundraising and everything we could do down in Alabama to help make sure that Doug Jones won that race. When Connor Lamb was running in the special election in Pennsylvania, we were piping phone calls and fundraising and everything we could do into Connor Lamb's race in Pennsylvania to help him win. And as other special elections come up, we don't know what the governor is going to do in Pennsylvania, but there could be 2 more congressional special elections coming up, and we're going to continue to be active in those and helping to work with campaigns around the country where there's a swing, or it could be a swing seat. So focusing on the swing seats to me is really, really, really key. There is so much that is fixed by having any of the two houses, House or Senate, back in Democratic hands. Right now, it's a monopoly, and because you can't bring up issues, you just never talk about them. We never talk about climate change as a body. We never talk about student loans. We haven't had a serious conversation about infrastructure of all things yet. You know, there's some really basic stuff that once you get a gavel in your hands and the ability to put things forward, off you go. You can change the whole dynamic of the whole debate. Not to mention what you can do through oversight and having a gavel and having subpoenas and being able to call hearings and ask questions and not have to be just at the tail end of the Republican effort. Yes, ma'am, you had your hand up. Was I surprised at the resignation of Paul Ryan? Tell you the truth, I was surprised at the resignation of this whole flood of Republicans who headed out the door. Now, there are a few of them who headed out the door with Me Too, getting ready to bite them in the rear end because they'd misbehaved and they'd used public money to pay women to be quiet and to hush it all up. So good riddance. For a lot of the others, I think what you hear that's interesting is once they've made the decision and they talk about it, they say, I can't bear it. I just can't bear it. This is not the Republican Party that I wanted to be a part of. I cannot justify Trump. I cannot justify these nominees. And I just soon get out. But it's pretty remarkable when a speaker walks away. Because a speaker is a very, very powerful position. You've got a whole team with you, and you're basically saying goodbye to the whole thing. So my guess is that he sees the same blue wave that we hope will come, and he wanted to just get out ahead of it. And I think he's probably also maybe just a little bit embarrassed at some of the water he's had to carry for President Trump. So yeah, it was a surprise. Yes, sir.
I have a question, but you mentioned Doug Jones. Doug Jones voted for Mike Pompeo as Secretary of State. So some of the allies that we look to really take a lot of actions that don't look like they're allies.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what. I'd rather have a Democrat named Doug Jones from Alabama, which is a really unexpected gift, than Roy Moore.
Well, yeah, anybody's better than Roy Moore.
Yeah. So I agree with you.
But I think it confuses people. What do the Democrats stand for? Doug Jones, 7 Democrats voted for Pompeo. What does the Democratic Party stand for? So I understand what you're saying.
Yeah,
I
get that.
Your typical Democrat's better than a Republican,
Yeah.
right? But when they're really not much better, then people say, well, what are the Democrats for?
Well, there are a lot of ways in which he's a lot better. One is by moving us a seat towards a majority. One of the reasons that we're in shooting distance of taking back the Senate is because of that win. Without that, we'd need another one, and it would look much more improbable. The second thing is it gives us key votes on things like the funding measure and other elements where now if you can just get 2 Republicans to defect, you can begin to move it on. So I take your point. I'm no fan of Mike Pompeo for Secretary of State, but I think right now somebody described the Trump administration as like having a fire going in your house. You really got to pay attention to put the fire out before it burns down the independence of the judiciary, before it burns down the independence of prosecutions, before it burns down respect for the media, before it burns down the respect for the career people who are our brain trust collectively for all of us in government, and all of that stuff. And I think if we go into this election worrying about our differences more than about the problem in front of us, we risk hurting ourselves in ways that are really really damaging. So I think that's going to particularly come true after these primaries. There are a lot of great congressional races with a lot of great candidates, often the first woman candidate, sometimes a great veteran candidate, really wonderful candidates. But we almost have too many of them in some places. We have 2 or 3 or 4. And when the primary is over, it's really going to be on all of us to pull together and say, okay, whoever it is, that's who we're in with. And we're not going to let division separate us because this is too important. So I'm all for having Doug Jones in the Senate, but I appreciate your point, yeah.
Going back just a little bit, how surprised were you that Rhode Island was 40% for Trump in the election?
You know, we were a Reagan state. So it's not like we don't have a history. We've had a lot of Republican governors. Trump is not in their mode. The New England Republican governor mode was, I'm not going to get into the social issues. I'm going to be good on the environment. I'm going to be a check on the legislature, which you may love, but you know could use a check on it.
No deficit.
And I'm going to be all about business and, you know, getting the finances right. And that worked in Massachusetts over and over again. It worked in Rhode Island over and over again. It worked in Connecticut over and over again. So this was a little bit different because Trump was so off base with a lot of those traditions. But I also think, you know, I was in office when the meltdown took place in 2008. And I can remember our community bankers coming in petrified about what they were seeing in Rhode Island economically. I can remember the car dealers coming in petrified, thinking they're going to have to close their doors. They didn't know when they were next going to sell another car. Dealing with the insurance agents. I mean, it was the realtors. Oh my God. People were so frightened, and people got hit so hard. And there were some people for whom it was so unfair. People who'd worked all their lives, never taken a day off, husband and wife, both out of their jobs, the bank coming after their house.
Yep.
What did I do wrong, they want to know. Nothing, but there I am in misery. And I think all of that misery, you know, created a resentment. And Hillary, I think she had the curse of the inevitable. And so she went into a mode where she was just, if we don't make mistakes, we're going to win. Just don't make mistakes. That's what we're going to do. We're just going to win. And there's Donald Trump. He's just out there throwing it left, throwing it right. He was connecting to a really irritated and frustrated mood in a way emotionally that we weren't effective in doing. So yeah, it surprises me a little, but I can see it. I can absolutely see it.
So we got to
Yes,
work
sir.
harder.
What do you anticipate, and how can you and we combat this dark money and fake news coming after you? What issues do you think you're vulnerable on and what can we do to help?
Well, first of all, with dark money and fake news, it doesn't matter. It's not a question of being vulnerable. They'll make it up, right? I mean, Hillary was not vulnerable on having a child sex ring in the bottom in the non-existent basement of a pizza shop. And yet, that got out there enough that some poor guy believed it enough that he drove from South Carolina up to Washington with a rifle and shot the door off their server closet and had the computers in it because he thought that was the way down to the dungeon and he was going to rescue little children. So, I mean, it's not a world in which you're kind of vulnerable on issues. I think we just have to go right at the problem. The problem is solved, I think, in a couple of ways. First is we got to open up disclosure of who's behind contributions. The Supreme Court, in that horrible Citizens United decision, said disclosure is fine. In fact, we assume that it's going to be transparent. The whole reason we're letting people do this is because we assume it's going to be transparent. So great, let's do the transparency. That's my bill in the Senate, the Disclose Act. If we pass that, that makes a huge difference. And my guess is that about 2/3 of the big money goes away. Because they don't want to be caught with their hands on it. If you're ExxonMobil, you can't run ads against me on environmental stuff. Because everybody will see, I'm ExxonMobil and I paid for this ad. They go, okay, we get it, enough. But if it's Rhode Islanders for Puppies and Prosperity paying for the ad, you've hidden who the actor is. Now suddenly you've got, you know, a whole game on. So transparency is a big deal to me. The fake news stuff is going to be tougher because in politics, very often, one side does something and the other side does the same thing, right? They do airplanes, so we do airplanes. They do submarines, so we do submarines. They do missiles, so we do missiles. With this one, with weaponized fake news, I fear for what becomes of our country if we match them and just start throwing out Democratic weaponized fake news. So I think what we've got to do is be really, really good at outing the mechanism that's behind the weaponized fake news. It's not happening spontaneously. It's being paid for, it's being designed. The whole mechanism is something that I think we should be focusing on and investigating. And I just led a 10-senator, I want to say, effort on the floor of the Senate to go after the Koch brothers and all the fake organizations that they have put up, so that it doesn't say Koch brothers on the front, it says Heartland, it says Energy Environment and Law Institute, it says all these other sort of mild-sounding names that are complete phonies, complete fronts. So going after them on that, and we will be doing a similar one on going after who's behind the fake news, because it's a lot of the same money that's behind the fake news, that's behind all of these phony operations, particularly the climate denial operations. By the way, climate denial is the original fake news. If you look at the way fake news is propagated, if you look at the tactics and the techniques, all perfected for climate denial. So it's a thing, it's a network, it's got connections and money that you can follow if you can see through the way they hide the money. And putting a big spotlight on that, I think, is a really important thing for us to do. And people are learning. I go on too long about this because it drives me nuts. I'm sorry, but I'll say one last thing. So Joe Donnelly is our colleague who's running for re-election in Indiana. The Koch brothers went after him right away. They brought in money, and it's like, Joe is against lowering your taxes, Joe's against your banks doing better, Joe's against this, Joe's against that. Joe didn't have the money that they had to hit him, to hit back. He had to punch smarter. And what he has said back is, this ad brought to you by two brothers from Wichita, Kansas, not even from Indiana. And when his opponents who are in a primary, when he gets questions about them and who do you know, any comment, he never comments about anything. He says, none of them matter. None of them matter. They're all just fronts for two brothers from Wichita, Kansas. And the result has been very, very successful for him. His numbers are not only holding, they're increasing, even though he's being outspent, because the public is beginning to catch on to these schemes. And if you bang on it a few times, they'll go, yeah, you're right, that doesn't make sense. Yes, okay, I get that. And that's, I think, the way we need to fight the fake news battle. We start replicating them, shame on us. Shame on us.
How worried should we be about the deficit? I know there's a lot of, not a lot of young people here, but I'm concerned about how big the deficit's gonna be with this tax cut that just went in.
Yeah, it's going to be huge. We're closing on $1 trillion. They went ballistic when we were at about $800 billion, I want to say.
Right.
When we were spending exactly the way economic theory tells you to spend in the depths of a recession, on infrastructure, on things that need done to put people to work to get the pump primed and rolling again. Now we're at statistically low unemployment levels. The economy is booming along. Trump is the first person to say stock markets are, super highs and all that. Now's the time you're supposed to be investing for the rainy day. And instead, they failed so badly on repeal and replace. They had nothing else to do for us. So what do you do if you're a Republican and you're stuck? Tax cuts. It's like the last thing to bring them together. So a really big tax cut. Well, out the window went all of their concerns about debt and deficit. They simply cannot be trusted on this subject.
They're acting like Democrats, huh?
Actually, if you look over time, we have always done better on debt and deficit under Democratic administrations than under Republican administrations. Right. Remember, it was Cheney who said deficits don't matter. Yeah, when it's you spending. So that's a battle we have to fight. I think that we can do it. I'm on the budget committee.
Right.
There's a chance, depending on how things break through the pecking order, that I could be the chairman of the budget committee. And I'm working on a strategy with a bipartisan, with a Republican senator to try to fix our process in the budget committee. Because our process in the budget committee completely stinks. you can't get to a good budget result through the budget committee process. It just is, it's a flawed design. It's like putting something through a mashing machine and hoping that it comes out the other end, you know, as a sports car. It just isn't going to happen. Machinery isn't designed for that. So I'm hoping that we can do that. The only way to solve the debt and the deficit is bipartisan. You cannot jam the other side
Right.
enough to do that. And the only way to solve it is to deal with spending, to deal with healthcare expense, to deal with revenue coming in, and to deal with tax spending. The biggest, sneakiest spending and all the tricks in the tax code that money goes out the back, more money goes out the back door of the tax code than Uncle Sam collects, to give you an idea. So you can slam a lot of those doors shut and keep that revenue. And there is a deal to be made, I believe, that takes all those pieces and puts them together and puts us on a glide slope to a sustainable debt to GDP ratio. And we're trying to get that process going, because at the moment, we're headed for a bad situation.
Very bad.
20 years from now.
Rich?
Spring is coming because I know the beginning of spring is when they paint the red, white, and blue stripe
Down Bristol.
Parkway for the Gatsby Day Parade.
Yeah.
So that should be coming soon.
And the line in Bristol.
Yes, the line in Bristol as well. However, I'm more concerned about locally, and Warwick's local to me. When I ran for the city council, there had not been a Democrat elected from Ward 1 in the past 30 years. And when I knocked on people's doors, I told them that I was applying for a job. And I said, no matter what, I said, you can't blame me for anything because I've never been in office before. This is the first time I'm running, and many people.
So now do we blame you?
You can certainly bring that up. I think I understand a little bit more about Rhode Island voters and this macro discussion over the entire country. And one issue that I have with Rhode Island, there's a few. One was, when I was running, many people were very much anti-Hillary. And I don't know that there were many Trump votes as many people that voted against Hillary. And one thing that bothered me locally was when we had our primary and Bernie Sanders won, that was taken away from the voters. And I thought that that was something that did not sit well with me, and I don't know if many people understand how that happened. And the other thing is, in Rhode Island, I mean, this is a very short period of time where all 4 of our congressional leaders have been Democrats. Rhode Island seems to have weird ways of inserting their own checks and balances through the governors, through a state office. But we've had mostly, in my life, a Republican president in Washington as well.
Yeah.
So I was always curious when people were complaining about the national level that we always had someone that was from the minority party, because in Rhode Island the number of Republicans is very small, and Rhode Island in general, the Republicans are probably a lot more progressive than many Democrats throughout the country. Rhode Islanders are Rhode Islanders, we're contrary. So the question over why, when we have a presidential primary and the voters vote for Bernie Sanders, which I believe would have won handily against Donald Trump, I don't understand that. And I hate the news. I can't even watch it anymore.
Yeah.
I don't watch it. The only thing I can listen to my car radio is NPR or the Red Sox. And at home when CNN is on, because my wife and kid likes to watch it. And I said, even this show is turning very, it's an entertainment channel, where everything's screaming at the bottom, things go all sides. But I would like you to discuss a little bit about the
way when, how it can be that voters voted for Bernie Sanders in Rhode Island, and that was never known nationally, and did not even come up at the convention.
I think we've got to take lessons from that into the next election. As I said earlier, I think the worst thing that we could do is divide ourselves by relitigating past elections. So, to me, the question is going to be, what are we going to do about the superdelegates?
Yes.
People who were committed first, before the results came in, and what is the best way to try to make sure that a really good candidate comes out of the field in 2020? Because, you know, how many times have we looked at Donald Trump and said, okay, that was the fatal mistake? The John McCain comment, the grabbing comment. I mean, over and over again, there have been these nobody can survive that moments. So his ability to come back up and keep going has been really alarming. And for that reason, I don't think we can write him off as a 2020 candidate. It'd be great if the Mueller investigation were so formidable in its output that it was simply a knockout punch, and everybody said, okay, you're right, that's too much, we're out of here, we're all done with him. But I don't think you can bet on that. And I don't see an obvious candidate for us right now. I see perhaps 20 competitive candidates. And what's most important to me is to try to make sure that whatever our process is, it is helpful towards putting our strongest candidate forward against Donald Trump. And I think we've got to be aware as we're choosing who our strongest candidate is, that this Republican attack machine that can make people believe in pedophile prisons in the basement of pizza parlors, and that can get Hillary, corrupt racist criminal, on the front of the National Enquirer on election day, and that can, you know, on and on and on it goes. Whoever our candidate is, they've got to be able to withstand that, because that's not going to stop. That is going to keep coming at us. So to me, what's most important is, do we have a process for selecting our best candidate who people can get behind and get excited about, and to make sure that we've got the resources behind that candidate so that when the fake news bombardment, when the lies and the smear start to come in, that we've got the resources and the motivation and the ability to push that back and counter it. And that's where my focus is.
Yeah, Senator Councilman Corley, at 2 months ago, the National Democratic Committee met in Washington, D.C. They voted to accept the recommendations made by the Unity Reform Commission of the Democratic National Committee. Part of those reforms are mandating that a percentage of each state's caucus and superdelegates reflect the primary decision of that state. So prospectively, the issues and reforms that you're looking for are taking place. And that was one of the first big steps. And as a party chair and a superdelegate, I don't have any problems with that. So those reforms are taking place, so we will not repeat that. And it wasn't just Rhode Island, it was across the nation. So stay tuned, but the process has been set in motion to reform the Democratic Party, to improve it and make it more responsive to the citizens.
Everything for me comes back to do we win in 2020? That's the bottom line. Everything gets that. Yes, sir.
But isn't it true, though, that if Republicans had the same superdelegate system as the Democrats, that Trump wouldn't have gotten the nomination?
Probably. I doubt he would have had a lot of super delegates.
Super delegates are always talked about in such a negative way, but there's a lot of positives that come with it too.
There could be. I'm not all that processy about this. Again, you know, 2018, we have got to win the House, and we got to do everything we can to take the Senate. Anything that doesn't contribute to that goal is a waste of our time. 2020, we've got to sort through an huge array of possible candidates and try to get the one who is going to be the toughest and the smartest and the most capable of winning and beginning to reverse the damage that Trump and his crowd of swamp creatures have done in our country. And by the way, it is not going to be easy to clean up after this guy.
Well, yeah, I have a question about that cleanup, because with the environment, Scott Pruitt seems to be doing such damage with the dismantling of regulations. And I remember so many years ago when our waterways were terribly polluted, how they've been uncleaned up in our air and stuff. It seems like every day there's some new regulation or old regulation that he's dismissing. And I don't hear a unified scream from the Democrats, from congressmen, and other than you. I think you're excellent on the environment. But a unified scream is saying, stop, you can't destroy what we spent years and years cleaning up. And how are we going to recover from this?
The bad news is that Pruitt is perhaps the most disgraceful person to serve in the cabinet. The good news is that he's also kind of wretched as a person. And so his conduct in office is as bad as his corruption policies. So you get the lights and sirens to the fancy restaurants, you get the $43,000 Maxwell Smart cone of silence secret phone booth, you get the bulletproof desk, and you get all the cronies going through the clean water fund to get money for them, and you get all this nonsense. They're starting to, the lobbyists renting to him for totally discounted prices and lying about it and all of that. So that's all beginning to blow up in his face. So that's the good news. The other piece of good news is he's not very good at what he does. He's obviously, like a lot of them, got a one-person audience in the Oval Office who he wants to convince that he's like the great environment destroyer of all time. But when you actually look at how he's doing legally and what he's doing with the rules, he's able to knock a few things down here and there, but he hasn't been that effectual. And back to the bad news again. The bad news is that if we were in a static environment, then this would all be fine. You'd swing back, and when the rule finally was adopted with proper rule of law procedures. The problem is, particularly with the climate stuff, time is not on our side. And what he's doing with his delays and his fooling around and his nonsense is buying his polluter cronies time. Time is what we don't have. So that's the danger. He's not necessarily that effectual, but he's wicked, and he's giving them time. Yeah, sorry.
I just want to give a little voice, and then I have a question about a little voice what the gentleman saying. Bernie won Rhode Island 55% to 43%. The delegate count was 20 for Hillary and 12 for Bernie. And that's very much what led to Trump. Because when the people say that their vote, what they're told by the elected officials, that their vote doesn't matter, they say, okay, well, the vote doesn't matter? Well, we'll show you. So if you don't see that that happened, and you can't fess up to it, all the super delegates across the country, including in Rhode Island, own it. That's my advice, if you wanted to move on. Should have already been owned over a year ago. My question is, I would like to hear your justification for voting for the largest military budget ever, and really starting it last fall with the NDAA, which we were talking about deficits 15 minutes ago, where we have exploding deficits. Why do we have a $700 billion military budget?
Well, you got to remember we're in the minority. We don't have a single gavel, and we don't have the White House. So the Republicans crafted the budget. And they put together what they wanted. And we had one piece of leverage, which is to say, give us equivalent funding on the domestic side, and then we'll go forward. Otherwise, there's a chance that they could have just rolled us. Now, we were lucky here because the Trump White House is so bad at doing its job that the Republicans in Congress had very little support. They had the horrible Mick Mulvaney budget, which they knew would be a lethal budget to take home if they actually passed it. And they had nobody sensible to talk to who could say, okay, we get it, that's not really the budget, here's what we really want. There was no go-to person in the Trump administration to do that. So they just threw up their hands and said, all right, let's work with you guys. And their priority was to raise the military budget. There was no way to budge them on that. What we could do in the situation in which we are is to make sure that we had an adequate domestic budget. And the result was we got one of the best domestic budgets we've ever seen. And Republicans all over the country are furious that they got had. So I'm actually pretty proud of the way that whole budget situation worked out. I don't think there's ever been a situation in which a smaller minority in the Washington system delivered a better budget for the values that we believe in. So do we get our budget? No. Is it the one that I would have written? No. Am I concerned that we're looking at a potential $1 trillion being spent on nuclear weapons coming up? Absolutely. But with the hand we were dealt, oh my God, we were very, very fortunate the way this turned out. And the people who come down to see me who are terrified by the Trump budget over and over and over again, whether it's LIHEAP or whether it's senior centers or whether it's community health centers or whether it's Meals on Wheels, we were able to defend. So on balance, I'm very proud.
How are you going to get the deficit to trend down then, like you were talking about?
Well, one good thing would be to go back after that wretched tax bill that they passed, but we can't do that unless we win a House.
It's not going to be the whole story.
What's not going to be the whole story?
But that's not going to solve the whole problem.
Not at once. I mean, we've run up a $20 trillion deficit. It's going to take time. But you got to put those four things together in a balance, and you've got to get on the glide slope to a sustainable debt to GDP level. And that's what I'm hoping we can organize ourselves to do.
Excuse me, Senator?
Yeah.
What is Mitch McConnell trying to do? Why is he not allowing this bill to come through to protect Mueller? And what kind of a man is he? Is he that venal?
He's extremely, extremely clever and calculating. I've never seen him take a significant interest in any substantive matter. He's a master of the art of the process. And I suspect that he wanted to say publicly that he would never bring up that bill on the floor in order to discourage the vote in the committee and to give people, particularly Republicans on the committee, an excuse to say, as Senator Cornyn did when he voted against it, why are we doing this? This isn't going to be brought up anyway. So he was kind of handing an excuse to the Republican members. Now, thank goodness for Chuck Grassley and Lindsey Graham and Jeff Flake and Tom Tillis, who all agreed to go ahead and do it anyway. And they passed it. I think it's pretty hard to say with any degree of reliability that President Trump is not going to fire Mueller. Since when was President Trump ever predictable, particularly when he's cornered? So I'm really glad that we got that bill through committee, and that even if it's not being called up on the floor now, that it's right there ready to be called up in a minute if it looks like the Trump folks have decided to make a move. He might then. He's going to do whatever helps his team the most. It's that simple.
But why does it help him if I don't understand what he gains by not voting or bringing it up.
He keeps it away from the news, that it's only in committee, that it's not on the floor. He protects a lot of his members from having to vote one way or the other, when it could be an awkward vote. And he protects himself from the phone calls from the White House saying, what the hell are you doing putting this on the floor and making this an issue? So there are a bunch of wins in there for him. Sorry. Hey Jim, welcome.
How are you?
Thanks for stopping by.
Sorry for the delay. I was at a medium memorial event.
I'm very glad to see you.
Show my support.
Our great Congressman Jim Lane.
Thank you. You've had a lively discussion here today. A lot of important topics. So.
Been a few. Rich, back to you, pal.
I have a question that's very important since Congressman Langevin came into the room, and that is, I'm afraid that something can be done during the census, given our population trends, that's going to have us lose a seat in Congress, and I don't think that the things that are being proposed concerning the census are being done without a purpose. I would imagine that Trump would like to see Rhode Island lose a representative, and that's why I think it was part of the reasons why they are trying to do something to change the way the census is done to lower our population. I want to know, what is it that we can do to contact people and to do something in Rhode Island to see that we don't lose that seat in the House, and what are the actual numbers concerning the population, which is going to make it very close to start off with. But what can we do to make sure there's not some sort of rigged system to lower our population when they take the census?
I'll ask Jim what the numbers are going to look like, because I don't have those off the top of my mind. But clearly, we have to make sure that Rhode Islanders know that they can and should participate in the census, which means we have to disconnect it from the law enforcement, immigration enforcement, etc. apparatus that is designed in the way they're going about it, I believe, designed to suppress participation and therefore drive the numbers down, which not only connects to the seats, but it also connects to certain of the program funds that come into states. So it actually hurts us financially when people don't show up and participate in the census. They had a dry run recently here, and it went very badly, and they know perfectly well it went very badly, so that was a good start. Give them a good bop in the nose on that. We've got enough money in the budget so that they can begin to gear up, and it's going to be, I think, very significantly a question of oversight and hectoring to try to get adequate census takers in place who are sufficiently disconnected from the anti-immigrant mechanisms of the Trump administration that people feel they can answer these questions, which they're in theory legally obliged to do. But if you're out trying to terrify them while you're doing it, you're obviously not going to get a response.
When you said it went badly, was it badly in the urban areas, which scares me, or was it elsewhere?
The test run was done in the Central Falls, Pawtucket area, I believe, so that was plenty urban. What do you think? What are the numbers, Jim?
Yeah, so there's no doubt that Rhode Island is on the bubble. There are about 5 other states that would have to lose a seat before it would get to Rhode Island, before Rhode Island would lose a congressional seat, as I understand it. We can't take anything for granted. Clearly, the administration is taking steps to make it harder to get an accurate census, especially when they have that one question on there at the beginning. The very first question is, are you a U.S. citizen? And that's designed obviously to intimidate people. again, Sheldon's right that we need to separate this from the law enforcement or the immigration question. The issue is that we need to have an accurate count of the number of people who are here in the state. Otherwise, we are going to be disenfranchised. It's going to be a disservice in terms of how federal resources are distributed, and we should want as accurate a count as possible. So I'm sure hopefully we will get that. There's court action to get the survey question thrown out, to take that question out, whether or not you're a U.S. citizen. Again, I think it's designed to intimidate people and discourage people from even filling out in the first place.
How do they choose the people that, many times I see ads taken in paper because they need people to step forward that will be willing to work to take the census. How is that done in Rhode Island?
So there's advertising going on right now, census positions that are available, whether it's people on the phones or going door to door, management positions, they're getting staffed up as I understand it right now.
I just got a quick technical question. If that question remains on the census form, are you a U.S. citizen? And somebody like me were to say no, or leave it blank, would that negate my overall response?
I don't know the answer to the question. I guess if you skip it, they would still count the other questions, but I'm not sure.
The answer can be no, and you go on because you're in the census even if you're not a citizen. It wouldn't be nice to be in a country in which that question, are you a U.S. citizen, didn't set off all those alarm bells that people hadn't been. It's a sign of where we are under this president that becomes a thing. Yes, sir.
Well, I wanted to kind of follow on to that point that was being made around the census. Between my wife and I, we had more than 7 years of federal service in federal agencies, and we, as career people, and we look to our colleagues in the Census Bureau and in the EPA, Department of Defense, Department of Labor, to act professionally and support the people in the country, just like we did in our roles. And to some extent, my question is, what can you be doing, what can we be doing to help defend the career civil servants who stand between the chaos of the Trump administration and the really horrible cabinet and sub-cabinet officials that are part of this administration. We've looked to those career folks to protect us, and we need to think of ways we can protect them.
If there are two really wicked things that this president has done, one of them is to call the fake news the real news, and the real news the fake news, and throw a cloud of doubt over that whole mess. When he says fake news, he's saying the exact opposite of what is true. Similarly, when he talks about the swamp, I think people are thinking about the big special interests, their high-paid lobbyists, the electioneering apparatus that empowers them, and all of the ways in which big powers come to Washington and try to scoop things for themselves. That, to me, is the swamp. To him, the swamp is our career, civil service. You're like a bank. You're the knowledge bank for the public. We got rid of the spoils system back in the 30s so that we could build that expertise and build that capability. And we have people who have given 10, 20, 30 years of their lives to become the expert in the government on something that could be really important. Perhaps it's the Hungarian parliamentary system and the parties in that system. which may not matter until suddenly there's a really big election out in Hungary and the Russians are involved and we need to figure out how to resist and fight back. And you gotta have the go-to person who knows that stuff. It could be what neonicotinoids do to bees for, you know, and having those and thousands of other questions that have an expert that we've paid for years to know their facts on this stuff and to take that whole body of experience and knowledge, and frankly, patriotism and loyalty to the country, and just dump on it and call that the swamp? It's just infuriating that he uses those two terms in their exactly opposite meaning. And there is an ulterior motive. Somebody knows that this actually works in the general public opinion, that you keep saying fake news, and people begin to question it. You keep calling the good guys the swamp, eventually they begin to question it.
It's a real disservice, I think, what he's done to undermine our confidence in the institutions of government in other respects as well. Look at how he's called into question the integrity of the FBI and the Justice Department, institutions that we rely on and to keep the balance and to do things the right way. Again, going back to career public servants that have devoted their lives to public services, the way he's attacked those institutions. It's really troubling.
Yes.
When those census forms are mailed, obviously they're mailed, if there's no contact, I believe they actually send people out, knock on doors or try to find people. So with the integrity of this administration, which is zero, and the credibility is zero, he could very easily say, go easy, don't be aggressive. They could do the whisper campaign, and that'll be enough to have us come up just short enough to lose the seat.
And we might be able to stop that in Rhode Island, where people might be keeping their eyes open for that, where mayors and local police chiefs and local elected officials and members of Congress and everybody are keeping an eye on that. But move down to Mississippi and what they might be doing with the black folk down there. Move to, Arizona.
Right, but is there...
And so there are a lot of places where you're right, because there may not be local checks and balances.
Is there any oversight mechanism within the Senate that possibly deal with the possibility of that happening? Or, I mean, how does the system work where how do you implement something to prevent him from overstepping and putting the word out, go easy in Rhode Island, and how does the government avoid that?
One of the things I'm hoping for, quite frankly, is that we have a Democratic majority after November, which puts us in a place where we can be more of a check and balance on this administration, the power and the recklessness that they demonstrated, including we would have the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform, which would be the primary place to hold hearings on the census process and making sure that things are done right. We're dotting the I's and crossing the T's and exposing areas where that process is either being weakened, where the administration is not carrying out properly, where it's called into question the integrity of the system. We'll have at least a venue where we can call those attention to those issues.
We can ask for hearings without that, but they might not hold them, so that's why we go in the gavel. We can send letters, but they might not answer them. I can't tell you how much unanswered mail I have into this administration. And you can stick a GAO onto the Government Accountability Office sometimes, and that can be helpful, but it's a slow process to get a good GAO study out. Those are the kind of basic tools that we usually work with.
Excuse me, Senator, if you were to run for president,
Don't think about it.
Would you, what is the attack from that Democrats done? What can change people's minds with this embedded group of people that will never change?
Well, let's wait and see, huh? Because 2018, I think you're going to see an awful lot of folks who voted for Trump, particularly people who voted for Obama beforehand, realize they got sold a bill of goods. If you're a firefighter and you voted for Trump and you just saw what they did in the Janus case to take away your ability to work and represent, get reimbursed for your work representing non-union folks, the municipal workers, that's about as lethal a punch to the existence of municipal unions as you could have. And they just went right at it. They just went right at it. So I think you're going to see a pretty big turn. I have a little bit more confidence in the American public on this. My personal feeling is that if we win in 2018, we've got to start passing things and forcing some real fights. And I don't think messaging gets you around having a real fight. We walked away from a bunch and we had a lot of power, and we should never let that happen again. We had a bipartisan immigration bill through the Senate, and we didn't make the House vote on it. The President has the power to call the House back into session. And through a long, early July to August recess, never did that, never forced the question. We got a climate change bill through the House, cap and trade. Senate never took up a single measure. Just let it die. And by the way, a lot of good people who voted for that bill lost their seats over that. And we just walked away from that. And on the dark money, we controlled the Internal Revenue Service, the federal election, well, not federal, that's not fair to say. We controlled the Internal Revenue Service, had seats on the Federal Election Commission, and controlled the Department of Justice. And we let everybody get away with all the lying and all the dark money nonsense through the 501c4s without even trying to tweak the rules to make sure that they followed the law. So there were three really big fights: dark money, immigration, and climate change, where we got to the 10-yard line and said, you know what, I'm tired, I'm not going to bother to fight this across the line. Once you've done that, it's pretty hard to recover with more messaging. So I think we got to get out there, pick the things we're going to do, and then by God, do them. And if we don't have it be such a knockdown, drag out to get them done, that there's no doubt in anybody's mind whose side we were on. I have a rather frustrated view about messaging as a technique compared to actually going in there and either winning or coming home with two black eyes so that everybody knows what fight you were in. Yeah.
First of all, I'd like to thank you for the support that you've given our TRIO programs as well as the congressman. When we met in your office in March with some of our alums, we talked about the Prosper Bill and Prosper Act, and we were kind of on the same team. I know it was proposed in the House or discussed in the House for the reauthorization of the Higher Education Act. And I was wondering if that looks like it is going to hit the floor at all, and if there's a possibility we can run out the clock and get the House and have a better possibility, a better act come next January.
On the Senate side, the Higher Education Act reauthorization would have to come through the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee. The only way they can jam us is by doing another budget reconciliation trick, like they pulled to try to do repeal and replace, or like they pulled to do their tax bill. I don't see them being able to pull that off. I don't see them caring enough about this to do a reconciliation just to jam through that bill. And I have some faith in Lamar Alexander, who was my chairman, that he would probably not let that happen. I think they want to do a legit higher reauthorization in that committee. So I just rolled off the committee when I got on finance, so I'm not on it any longer, but I'm still obviously very close to it. And we had prepared a lot of stuff for when the higher ed authorization bill was going to go. So I think we're pretty safe on that count. They can't roll us, I don't believe. They don't even want to roll us. And there's a lot of good work to be done, and the Prosper Act, as I understand it from the House, is so horrible that it's got zero shot to get Democratic votes. So be like, okay, thanks, appreciate that you did that, but now let's sit down and do a serious piece of bipartisan legislation in the Senate. That's how I think that comes out. So we're in reasonably good shape. They rolled us twice because they could do those simple majority bills through the so-called reconciliation process. But they can't do that willy-nilly. They can only do that after they go back to the budget committee, get another reconciliation measure passed, bring it back to the floor, go through all of that. And if they were going to do that, I don't think they'd do it for the higher end bill. They'd let that work in bipartisan fashion. Yes, sir.
I've lost track of the gerrymandering decisions. I know there have been favorable ones in the federal court. Is that going to affect the chances of the positive effect on the chances of retaking the House?
So this gets a little bit interesting. I've looked at it very closely. I've written about it. John McCain and I wrote a brief together to the United States Supreme Court on the gerrymandering question, telling the court that they should fix this, and here's how. In the old days, gerrymandering, as you know, was to protect one friend. And it was Governor Elbridge Gerry's Senate fixer up in the Massachusetts House. Hence the word gerrymander, because the district looked so weird finding all his friends that it ended up looking like a salamander, hence gerrymander. So that was the old school way. You find your friend and you build a district made entirely of his friends and you protect him. It didn't take long for politicians to figure out, oh, well, if you can build a friendly district, we can also build an unfriendly district. So for many years, gerrymandering was about helping your friends with friendly districts and hurting your enemies with unfriendly districts. Then came this Republican program called the Red Map Project. And they looked at gerrymandering a whole new way. And what they did is they went to the swing states, Wisconsin, Ohio, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Florida, and they did something counterintuitive. They built hyper-strong districts for Democratic members of Congress. In fact, they made them so hyper-strong that they sucked Democrats out of the state population into those districts. They made districts so that the rest of the state, once they carved it out, suddenly was Republican. And the result was, in Pennsylvania, in the following election, 2010, I want to say it was, they lost by a squeaker. The Republicans lost by a squeaker the vote count for members of Congress in that state. The delegation that went to Congress that year, 5 Democrats, 13 Republicans. So the election was basically 51-49, and the delegation was basically 25 to 75. What? So the good thing about that is you can spot it. It's got a big red flag. Here's what the vote is. Here's what the delegation mix is. Something's up. Plus they confessed. They sent a memo saying, ta-da, we should have lost, we won, because we did all this clever gimmickry. So I think that the Supreme Court will probably take a shot at it.
Will that be heard before the 18th election?
It may or may not, but here's the weird thing. If you're going to gerrymander a state, a whole delegation, and you're trying to maximize your number of Republicans, what you have to sacrifice is having solid, big majorities for those Republicans. Because as soon as you give a Republican, say, more than an 8-point majority, you want to take that extra, let's say you want between 8 and 10 points, you want to take those 2 points and gerrymander it over to some other guy, so that can be Republican. So the price of bulk gerrymandering is that the districts actually end up being fairly vulnerable to a wave. They're planned to survive with a 6-point, 8-point lead in a regular election. That's their device. But you get a 10-point, 12-point, 15-point wave, which we're starting to see in some of these elections, and suddenly, whew. So wouldn't it be nice if all their crafty, sneaky, tricky gerrymandering stuff actually came back and caused a huge Republican wipeout at their own hands because of the way they had done this? So knock on wood, we'll see how that goes, but they could have been just a little too cute. Yes, ma'am. Say again, I'm sorry?
Can you explain the Sanders-Lee bill and why you voted against it?
The Sanders-Lee bill? Yes, the Sanders-Lee bill was a mechanism that came to the floor to try to limit the capabilities and the activities of the U.S. military, particularly in and around Yemen. But it affects the whole area. It had not had a hearing. It had not gone through committee. It was opposed by all the lead Democrats on the committee. We had a very extensive briefing by Secretary Mattis as to how, written the way it would be dangerous and unhelpful for our troops who are in the area. And we have been fighting now for, I understand the frustration behind it, but Menendez and Cardin, our two leads, have been fighting for a long time to get a proper committee review and catch up the old AUMF and put a thought through, with a record, regular order thing in place. And that's what I support. So I voted no on that measure. Yes?
I was wondering, Paul Ryan said that since he was a sophomore in college, he's been dreaming of reducing the deficit, which I don't think many sophomore boys that I taught in college dreamed of that.
Yeah, how about that?
But how did he reconcile with this budget? That's why I think he's getting old. I mean, it looks like he's a phony.
Yeah, he played some tricks. He put together a budget that satisfied the far-right ideologues, but that he knew perfectly well would crush Republicans who voted for it. So he put it through as a budget, knowing perfectly well it was never going to pass, but it gave him some personal cred with the right-wing think tanks that he was doing what they wanted. Then he could never get it passed or bring it to the floor because it would have been, concluded as a bill, because it would have, how do you go home and explain why you killed Meals on Wheels? It just doesn't make any sense. So it was a sort of a small version of what we looked at just now in the funding bill. And I think he probably was, I don't think he was frustrated, because I think that his entire budget exercise was designed to cozy up to far-right think tank types, and he never intended to get that passed. I don't think he was a real hair-on-fire ideologue to say, this is what we need to do, I'm absolutely going to fight it through, and oh my gosh, even when we control all the houses and the White House and everything, we still can't do what I dreamed of doing, so I give up. That's not what I think he was up to. I think he was staging and planning and scheming to try to position himself with the far-right budget cutter types as just the kind of guy that they love, and at the same time not force those votes. So I think the whole thing was a phony from the very get-go. It was an exercise in say one thing, do another. So I don't know why he left, but I don't think it's because he was sincere about trying to actually pass into law as a funding measure the so-called budgets that he jammed through as a budget chairman.
I'd like to chime in here, my perspective on not only Paul Ryan, but the Republicans as well, and what they're doing. I think it's more nefarious than what meets the eye, and that what they have not been able to accomplish through policy changes in budget cutting. I believe the measures that they're passing are systematically going to require somehow defunding important parts of the government later on down the road when deficits get too large. And they clearly want to get through tax reform that benefited major corporations and the wealthy 1%. There's no doubt some people did see a benefit from lower tax rates, but when you put it on the scales of balance, the changes that were made far benefited the corporations and the wealthy 1%, and there were basically crumbs for the middle class. So, when some people saw a little bit, the paychecks take home a little bit more, but it was far smaller in comparison. So that added now anywhere between 1.5 to 1.9 trillion dollars to the national debt over the deficit over the next 10 years. And then you look at back when when President Bush was in power and the Republicans had the House and the Senate, when President Clinton left office, we had balanced budgets and budget surpluses as far as the eye could see. And then it came Bush and the Republicans, and they actually brought in that passed a major tax cut. They never addressed spending. So you had spending here, you had revenue up here, and all of a sudden revenue drops precipitously. They never had spending, and then it increased. And what they did is they took out the national credit card to pay for the difference. And that's what they're doing with the tax cut that just passed. Basically, it's putting on the national the credit card. And at some point, we are going to have a moment where we have to no longer deficit spend. We're going to have to get our fiscal house in order. The sooner we do that, the better. But it's going to be tough negotiations, tough decisions that will need to be made, which we have to make with those budget cuts. But also, it's going to involve new revenue. But what the Republicans they have not had the courage or the intestinal food to do by explaining to American people how they want to, where they want to cut. They don't have that. They're not candid. They don't have the courage to do it. And instead, they're going to force that decision somewhere way down the road. And their real goal is to drastically cut and change entitlements of Social Security and Medicare. I think it's irresponsible, it's wrong, and we need to hold them accountable.
It's always been our suspicion that they were doing these things to run up the deficit so that they would then have an arguing point to go after their perennial enemies, Medicare, Social Security, and Medicaid. Interestingly, since the tax bill, they're now saying it. They're actually confessing this is what they need to do. And when Ryan said that remark, he was talking about cutting Medicaid. And like you said, I was a college kid, and I did stand around kegs. And I can promise you, we were not talking about it. And I was not thinking about cutting Medicaid. I was wondering where the next keg was, more likely. Yeah, it shows how weird some of these characters can be.
How do you bear up under all this pressure? What do you do to keep your mind from being totally crazy?
Long walks, that helps. Chocolate ice cream with marshmallow sauce sometimes helps. And also the really strong sense of solidarity and support that I get. Solidarity with colleagues. I mean, we really are pulling together in the Senate on a lot of these things. And when you consider how little power we have in the way power is structured, Washington, we're punching way above our weight right now. We're really doing, considering how little we have to work with, we're doing actually really pretty darn well. So that's kind of reassuring. And then my supermarket measure is how often people talk to me when I'm in the supermarket. And before the last election, it was usually a couple of highs and one like medium-sized conversation. That would be like the average supermarket visit. Since the election, it's like a conversation per aisle. So the feeling in Rhode Island that people are motivated, that they care, that they appreciate, that they understand, that they want things to change, all of that has been very, very significant in keeping a strong heart, which is important in a long fight.
And I think the other, and I'll add to that, how we all keep our sanity, we make sure we come home every weekend, and we stay connected to the people that sent us down there. We get re-inspired and re-energized, knowing why we're going down there, why we're engaged in the fight.
Yes, sir.
I just want to follow up to the comment on Yemen.
Yeah.
Talking about the Yemen situation. It sounds hollow to me. Maybe you can explain it to me. Those authorized use of military force are 15 and 17 years old. And so you need a committee to review it. Like, what's been happening in the last 6 years, 8 years? I mean, Obama was doing a lot in the Middle East, Northern Africa. So has it been looked at that you need this committee?
War Power Act? A new War Power Act?
I think there needs to be a review of it, and the committee is the place to do that. It's the committee that can call the witnesses, it's the committee that can recommend to the rest of the Senate what they're supposed to do. And by the way, our senior Democrat on that committee is Jack Reed, in whom I have a great deal of confidence and for whom I have a great deal of respect. So I very much want him to be taking a crack at this. Unfortunately, the chairman right now is not around. So, Senator McCain would be a helpful person to do that.
Reed, for the last 6, 8, 10 years, hasn't come up with a way to rein in the president. I mean, the caught war.
Well, it was our president for a while, remember?
Who's president? If a bomb is marked with a D, it still kills. So that's part of the thinking that is really stinking with the Democrat Party right now.
Yeah.
Is the bombs are marked with a D, then when whatever destruction happens, I don't know if you've seen some of the videos, I don't know if you look at what's happening in Yemen and the wedding where they blew the people up. I don't know if you've seen that video or not. When you see under a tent that there's a wedding going on, a wedding, okay, and a bomb is dropped in. Yeah, right now it was marked with an R, but nothing like that happened with Obama. There's been plenty of bombs dropped. We're selling hundreds of billions.
I hear it.
Okay, well, then, I
But
mean,
I just think
Obama is not our president if he's killing people in our name.
There's I think, a different sense of confidence, particularly among Democrats, for a president like Obama, who was a Democrat, and for his team. And I think more confidence in what they were doing than under this team. I think that almost goes without saying. So I think that does in fact ramp up the pressure to now try to do something bipartisan and try to get ahead of this, particularly with Trump making a lot of very bellicose threats in a lot of areas where he could start entirely new things. I mean, thank goodness that Secretary Mattis is there as a check on this, because who knows what he might do if he had somebody less experienced and principled in that place. But I do think that the election changed the dynamic in the Senate about how much oversight was needed on this and what the upside and the downside was of reviewing the AUMF. And so that is why I think we're pushing forward now, trying to get those hearings.
Isn't that what the Sanders Lee bill would have forced that conversation to happen? How can we rein it in? How can we, since Trump is a greater danger, okay, which I agree with you that he is, right? So since he is, well, do we bypass the committee that's not getting it done and have an actual public debate about how do we rein in his war-making powers given the destruction that's being caused right now?
I think the debate we want is a debate in the committee, in the regular order of the Senate, passing something that appeared through a parliamentary device on the Senate floor and then was done. That was going to go over to the House and never get heard from again. So the idea that that was going to start a national debate, I don't think that was. I think what we really need is to get a bipartisan process going on this. And I know it's what the Foreign Relations Committee and the Armed Services Committee are working on doing. And I'd like to see it move forward, but I do think that having it move forward through the prospect of a bipartisan process, at least, may end up partisan at the end, but at least the committee process provides the prospect of bipartisanship. And particularly Corker has not been that bad to work with on issues. He's been bipartisan from time to time. So the Foreign Relations Committee has not been a complete partisan nightmare. And on their Armed Services Committee, Jack Reed and John McCain have had a good relationship, and the authorizations that they've done and so forth have been very bipartisan. So I don't think it's beyond hope that the pressure that we're putting on to try to get those hearings underway will succeed. And I think that is the best way to get something that is lasting, that will get taken up in the House, that will be meaningful, and that should be our test. So, and if we disagree on that, I'm sorry that we disagree, but there we are. That's
I appreciate the engagement.
Yeah, of course.
Sincerely.
Of course, of course. All right, should we do one more? And
No.
you have a question in the back, Joe?
I do not have one more.
Flagging the clock for me? Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
The President of France, the Chancellor of Germany, and I think the Prime Minister of England, I think all three of them are going to come over here and talk about the Iran treaty. And what I'm concerned about is they're kind of talking to the wall. Is there anything the Senate can do to, obviously, if I remember correctly, that treaty was with 6 different countries. Can't there be something done so that just doesn't get broken just because of one person?
It's really hard procedurally, and it's really hard politically, because this thing has been heavily politicized. The fact that this was done by President Obama has made it something that Trump and Republicans are now tribal about hating. And they went at it very early. It was on this negotiation, I think, that Tom Cotton sent the letter from the Republicans to the Ayatollah saying, don't deal with this president. I mean, imagine that. So
But if we don't listen to our allies, what I'm kind of concerned about, my son spent a year.
How often do we get China, Russia, Great Britain, Germany, and France all lined up on something, which, by the way, did, in fact, stop dead in its tracks and shut down the Iranian nuclear plant? Now, was there a time when they could stand it back up in the out years, 15 years out from then? Yes, but that gives you time to make sure that they don't, as opposed to having it happening right now.
Right.
And should we focus more on going after their ballistic program? Absolutely. Should we focus more on going after their mischief meddling in nearby countries to support terrorism? Absolutely. Are the French and the Germans and the Brits willing to do that? Probably. Can you get the Chinese? A little bit more complicated. The Russians are hugely complicated by where they are in Syria right now. So to a certain extent, it's going to take some jostling to work that through. I think we can do that. I think that to an extent, there was a reasonable play going on with Trump saying, I'm going to blow the whole thing up unless you work harder and make it better. And if they then did, then you could say, okay, he made a threat, they upped their game, and we got better security from Iran. But if he actually does blow it up, then we lose all of our credibility, we lose all of our negotiating position. It puts the Iranians in a very powerful position with those other entities, because they kept their word and we didn't.
We lose the inspectors on the ground.
We lose the inspectors who are going in, and they're under the toughest international atomic energy inspection regime of any country in the world right now. So they just tell them to go buzz off. So it's a hugely risky proposition if he decides to pull out of the so-called JCPOA. And if he does, I don't think we have anything like a plan for what we do next. I mean, the State Department has been shellacked by this administration. The Secretary of State is a week in office now. The idea that we're going to be able to manage the fallout from that decision in some sensible way. I think when you're dealing with, nuclear conflict in a group like the Iranians, it's helpful to go in thoughtfully and have a plan rather than just kick the whole bucket over and see what comes out of it. And so I'm very nervous about the JCPOA. And I think that Angela Merkel did raise that with the president. I know for a fact that it was the lead purpose of the Macron visit. So we'll just have to wait and see. But this is one of those situations where I think, notwithstanding the facts on the ground, notwithstanding the advice of Mattis and the national security professionals, notwithstanding the advice of his last Secretary of State, the president is just fixated on the fact that this was an Obama achievement, and by God, he's going to take it down and make it look bad. Katie bar the door. And then we'll have to see how we fight our way through that, but it makes me very nervous. So Anyway, thank you all for sharing this time with me. I really appreciate it. We are obviously engaged politically in this campaign. If you're interested in participating, please do. Joe Caiazzo, as I said, is the campaign manager. Outside, there are cards where we can be in touch with you. We are not only using our contacts in Rhode Island to work on the campaign, but also to make sure that we are able to project a little bit of Rhode Island common sense and passion and energy into other races and help the Doug Joneses and the Connor Lambs and so forth. So please let us know how to find you, and if there are opportunities to help in those areas that you'd like, you'll know them and you can come in and help make a difference. So much appreciated that you spent your afternoon with me, and very grateful to you for coming out.
Thank you.
Thank you.